Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the world of Viking female sexuality, a reality that somehow mixed revolutionary sexual freedom, mystical rituals, powerful vulvas, and intimate practices that would make any modern person rethink everything they thought they knew about the Middle Ages. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world to discover historical truths that have been carefully hidden for centuries. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey together. Forget everything Hollywood taught about submissive and silent Viking women. There were no chastity veils, no mandatory convents, not even priests controlling every aspect of female intimate life. What existed was something much more surprising. Women who controlled their own sexuality in ways that would shock even modern feminists. The myth versus reality of Viking women. Deconstructing the image of oppressed women, forget the submissive Viking woman from movies, always pregnant and serving mead in silence. Reality was completely different. Viking women owned land, commanded slaves, and initiated divorces when they wanted. While other European women were male property, they negotiated their own marriages. This myth arose with Christian chroniclers who were horrified by the immorality of Nordic women. They rewrote history to fit Christian values, unable to accept that pagan women had more freedom than holy Christian women. The sagas document women like the deep-minded, who led entire migrations, or Odd, who multiplied fortunes through intelligent trade. The Icelandic legal code guaranteed the right to divorce for bad breath, impotence, or even husbands wearing overly feminine clothes. Female graves contained swords, axes, and luxurious ships. The famous Oseberg lady was buried with one of the richest vessels ever discovered. This is not treatment for a submissive housewife. The real power of women in Nordic society. A Viking woman could divorce by publicly announcing in front of witnesses, impotent husband with bad breath or wearing feminine clothes, immediate divorce. The process was simple, and her word was enough. They controlled properties independently of husbands. They inherited land, cattle, slaves, and ships, managing these fortunes alone. Many became richer than their spouses through intelligent trade. During male expeditions lasting years, women assumed absolute control. They commanded servants, decided on cultivation, managed finances, and defended properties against invaders. Viking women controlled trade routes, negotiating amber, furs, slaves, and weapons. Some accumulated fortunes rivaling kings. They dominated the luxury textile industry, producing fabrics exported throughout Europe. The vulvas, female shamans, occupied unique positions. They practiced Nordic magic and were consulted about harvests and military strategies. Even kings trembled before their prophecies and sought their counsel for war and peace decisions. Striking differences with other medieval cultures. While Viking women could testify in court and own property, in the Christian world, they were legally incapable. In France, a woman couldn't testify. In Norway, she could be a judge. Vikings saw marriage as a modifiable contract with divorce by female initiative. Christians considered marriage indissoluble, with woman as husband's property. Vikings treated sexuality naturally. Christians saw it as necessary sin. Frankish chroniclers called Viking women demonic for their independence. Irish monks were more shocked by the women accompanying raids than by the violence itself. Arab women were covered and forbidden to speak to strangers. Vikings wore provocative necklines and negotiated directly with men. Roman women had arranged marriages. Vikings actively participated in partner selection. Viking freedom had a price: obligation to defend family honor and participate in bloody vengeance. Society demanded extraordinary physical and mental strength. Weakness wasn't tolerated. When Christianity arrived, the church worked to civilize Viking women. Christian laws eliminated female rights, labeling ancient freedom as diabolic paganism. In 200 years, Scandinavian women lost most ancestral rights. Female sexual freedom in Viking culture. Right to divorce initiated by women. Viking divorce was revolutionary. A woman summoned witnesses, publicly announced her decision, and the marriage was dissolved. No courts, no questioning, no years of litigation. Her word was enough. Accepted reasons were extraordinarily broad: impotence, persistent bad breath, violence, sexual neglect, or husband wearing feminine clothes. Sexual incompatibility was legitimate grounds. Society recognized sexual satisfaction as a female right. Divorced women kept dowries, half the assets, and frequently received compensation for male negligence. Socially, they faced no ostracism. They could remarry and maintain independent businesses. Divorcees created balance in marriage. Husbands knew dissatisfied wives had real alternatives, encouraging respectful treatment and attention to female needs. Control over one's own sexuality. Viking women decided when, with whom, and how to relate intimately. Consent was fundamental. Forced sex was a serious crime, punished with heavy fines or death. The definition included blackmail and excessive social pressure. Single women had considerable sexual freedom. Premarital relationships didn't cause status loss. Virginity wasn't an obsession. Experienced women were often more desirable. They knew varied contraceptive methods, from herbs to primitive devices. They decided when to get pregnant, how many children to have, and at what intervals. This reproductive autonomy gave them real power over destinies. Extramarital relationships were treated pragmatically. Discretion mattered more than morality. Some wives maintained parallel relationships with husbands' knowledge. Female homosexuality was tolerated, especially among vulvas. Viking laws were specific about sexual crimes. Forcing oral sex cost 12 cows fine. Touching breasts without permission cost 3 cows. Grabbing female genitals resulted in 6 cows. These fines were paid directly to the woman, recognizing her as primary victim, not damaged family property. Women had legal right to change their minds during any sexual act. If she said no at any moment, even after initial consent, continuing was considered rape with severe punishments. Female witnesses were accepted in these cases. Revolutionary for medieval times. Female masturbation was not only accepted, but actively encouraged as bodily self-knowledge. Vulvas taught young women specific techniques using polished wooden objects, honey as natural lubricant, and positions to maximize personal pleasure. It was practical sexual education transmitted exclusively between female generations. Oral sex was common practice and completely socially accepted. Viking women knew detailed fellatio techniques and expected total reciprocity from male partners. Men who refused to practice oral sex on their partners were considered inadequate lovers and faced social ridicule. The concept of sexual trial period existed before marriage. Couples could live together for a year experimenting with sexual compatibility before formalizing union. If the woman considered the man inadequate in bed during this period, she could end the relationship without social or financial penalties. Viking women practiced anal sex as contraceptive method and for pleasure. This practice was accepted between couples and carried no moral stigma. Natural lubricants like animal fat and vegetable oils were commonly used and discussed openly among women. Multiple female orgasms were known and valued. Viking men were educated about female anatomy and techniques to provide multiple climaxes to partners. Women who didn't regularly achieve orgasm had grounds to complain about sexual inadequacy. Socially accepted intimate rituals and practices. Viking sexuality was integrated with spirituality. Fertility rituals were community events where sexuality was openly celebrated, aligned with solstices and seasonal changes. The Disablot, festival of fertility goddesses, included sensual dances and public ritual, sexual acts considered sacred. Vulvas conducted sexual initiations for young women, teaching physical aspects and spiritual power of sexuality. Communal baths created controlled intimacy environments where flirting was accepted. Marriage rituals included public consummation with witnesses confirming sexual union. Sexual magic practices were common among vulvas, who used sexual energy to channel spiritual power. Seasonal festivals incorporated explicit sexuality, with intimate behaviors becoming public and celebratory. Sexual objects were common in domestic contexts. Erotic poetry was a respected art form. Ritual prostitution existed in religious contexts, where sexuality was used for mystical and therapeutic purposes. Sexual education began early, female responsibility. Menstruation was treated as power, not curse. Menstruating women were considered magically powerful, and periods were celebrated as connection with divine feminine forces. Viking marriage, more business than romance. Matrimonial arrangements and dowries. Viking marriage was fundamentally a commercial transaction disguised as romantic ceremony. Families negotiated unions as if they were cattle import contracts or land acquisitions. Love was optional luxury. Economic advantage was essential. Matrimonial negotiations began years before ceremony. Parents evaluated candidate families' patrimony, analyzed lineages, calculated political benefits, and estimated reproductive potential. It was a meticulous process, rivaling modern commercial audits. Female dowry wasn't symbolic gift, but strategic investment. Women brought land, cattle, slaves, ships, and even exclusive trade routes. Some Viking brides were richer than grooms, completely inverting traditional dynamics of other cultures. The mundium, price paid by groom to bride's family, functioned as compensation for losing valuable worker. The more skilled woman in trade, crafts, or administration, the higher mundium demanded. It was financial recognition of female economic value. Matrimonial contracts specified details that would impress modern lawyers. Property division, domestic responsibilities, minimum sexual frequency, divorce conditions, and even adultery penalties were legally documented. Arranged marriages didn't mean total absence of female choice. Viking women could veto suitors considered inadequate, especially if they proved sexual or economic incompetence. Some rejected dozens of candidates before accepting satisfactory union. Mutual sexual expectations. Viking marriage established explicit sexual contract between spouses. Both parties had clearly defined sexual rights and obligations, protected by law and supervised by community. It was legal formalization of intimate life. husbands were obliged to sexually satisfy their wives regularly. Persistent sexual neglect was legal grounds for divorce with financial compensation. Impotence, chronic premature ejaculation, or refusal to practice oral sex were considered serious contractual failures. Wives had sexual availability obligation, but with specific limitations. They could refuse sex during menstruation, advanced pregnancy, postpartum period, or simply when ill. Forcing sex in these circumstances was legal violation of matrimonial contract. Minimum sexual frequency was legally stipulated. Couples should maintain intimate relations at least 3 times per week, except during specific restrictions. Spouse consistently failing to meet this quota faced formal complaints before local authorities. Specific sexual techniques were openly discussed during matrimonial negotiations. Families investigated candidates' sexual abilities, consulted ex-partners, and even demanded practical demonstrations in some extreme cases. Mutual pleasure was expectation, not luxury. Marriages where only one spouse was sexually satisfied were considered failed. Community intervened with advice, medications, and even temporary partner substitutions in desperate cases. The role of fertility in society. Fertility was cultural obsession, determining social status, political power, and economic security. Infertile women faced brutal ostracism. Sterile men lost community respect. It was biological pressure shaping all matrimonial decisions. First pregnancy was crucial marriage milestone. Couples had approximately 2 years to produce offspring. Failure to conceive resulted in family investigations about possible sterility causes. Male children were especially valued as future warriors and heirs. Women producing only daughters faced pressure to continue trying until generating at least one male child. It was biological lottery with devastating social consequences. Fertility methods included mystical rituals, specific diets, and recommended sexual positions. Specialized vulvas offered treatments combining herbal medicine with sexual magic to increase conception chances. Spontaneous abortions were tragedies that could destroy marriages. Multiple miscarriages were interpreted as divine curses or female incompetence. Some women were abandoned by husbands after repeated losses. Concubinage was a practical solution for fertility problems. Men married to infertile wives could take concubines specifically to produce heirs. These women received semi-official status, and their children were legally recognized. Divorces for infertility were common and socially accepted. Sterile spouse rarely contested matrimonial dissolution, recognizing failure to fulfill essential reproductive function. It was brutal pragmatism, prioritizing family continuity over personal happiness. Intimate practices and taboos. Rudimentary contraceptive methods. Viking women possessed surprisingly sophisticated contraceptive arsenal for medieval standards. They combined herbal knowledge, physical methods, and sexual timing to control fertility with effectiveness rivaling primitive modern techniques. Contraceptive herbs were prepared in specific potions. Tansy, rue, and parsley were boiled together and taken daily by sexually active women. Artemisia was chewed before sex, while wild carrot seeds were consumed immediately after relations to prevent implantation. Barrier methods included vaginal tampons made of wool, soaked in honey and vinegar. Some women inserted small polished stones in uterus, functioning as primitive intrauterine devices. Animal fat mixed with herbs was used as natural spermicide. Coitus interruptus was common practice but controlled by women. They signaled when men should withdraw, assuming control over method other cultures left entirely in male hands. It was significant sexual power inversion. Anal sex was widely practiced as contraceptive method. Viking women didn't carry Christian taboos about anal penetration and saw it as practical alternative to avoid pregnancy. Natural lubricants like whale fat and vegetable oils were commonly used. Fertility calculations were based on careful menstrual cycle observation. Experienced women could identify fertile periods with impressive precision, avoiding vaginal sex during high fertility windows and concentrating sexual activity in safe periods. Fertility and seduction rituals. Viking fertility rituals combined spirituality with explicit sexuality in ways shocking other cultures. These community events celebrated reproduction as divine force, not embarrassing bodily function to be hidden. The Disablot was an annual festival dedicated to fertility goddesses. Women danced semi-nude around sacred fires, sang erotic hymns, and performed public sexual simulations. Men observed reverently, allowed to participate only when invited by celebrants. Seduction rituals involved practical magic, transmitted between female generations. Women learned specific spells to attract desired men, including potions made with own bodily fluids, sexual amulets, and enchantment techniques through prolonged eye contact. First menstruation ceremonies marked transition to active sexual life. Young women received detailed education about anatomy, pleasure, and sexual power during 3-day rituals. It was formal initiation into adult female sexuality. Fertility baths occurred in sacred thermal springs, where couples trying to conceive performed ritual sexual acts. Community observed these ceremonies as spiritual events, not voyeuristic spectacles. It was sacralized, not profaned sexuality. Vulvas conducted sexual healing rituals for people with intimate dysfunctions. These treatments combined genital massage, psychoactive herb ingestion, and therapeutic sexual acts performed by the vulva herself as spiritual medicine. What was considered normal versus scandalous? The line between acceptable and scandalous sexual behavior in Viking culture was radically different from other medieval societies. Practices resulting in execution in Christian world were considered normal, while apparently harmless acts could cause social scandal. Oral sex was completely normal and expected. Men refusing to practice cunnilingus were ridiculed as inadequate lovers. Women openly discussed fellatio techniques. It was standard part of adult sexual life without stigma. Public masturbation was accepted in specific contexts. During fertility festivals, both men and women masturbated openly as offerings to what caused real scandal. Passive men in homosexual relationships faced brutal humiliation. While penetrating another man was tolerated, being penetrated was considered unacceptable feminization, permanently destroying masculine reputation. Sex during menstruation was absolute taboo. Menstruating women were considered dangerously magically powerful. Men ignoring this prohibition risked supernatural curses and community ostracism. Incest was horrible crime, punished with death or permanent exile. Relationships between close relatives violated cosmic order and threatened social stability. It was one of few universally respected sexual taboos. Sex with same-sex slaves caused status loss for owners. Free men maintaining relationships with male slaves were socially demoted. Free women with female slaves faced ridicule, but less severe punishments. Flagrant male adultery was scandalous when publicly humiliating wife. It wasn't sexual act that mattered, but public dishonor inflicted on family. Discretion preserved honor. Ostentation destroyed reputations. persistent refusal to fulfill conjugal sexual duties was considered matrimonial treason. Spouses consistently denying sex without medical reason faced legal process and heavy financial compensations. The vulva and sacred sexuality. Female shamans and their sexual power vulvas occupied unique position in Viking society as intermediaries between human and divine worlds, using sexuality as direct channel to supernatural power. Unlike Christian priestesses who renounced sex, vulvas fully embraced their sexuality as primary source of spiritual authority. Vulva power derived from belief that female sexual energy was fundamental cosmic force. They not only practiced magic through sexuality, but also channeled orgasms as altered consciousness states to receive prophetic visions and communicate with ancestral spirits. Vulvas maintained multiple sexual partners as part of spiritual practice. Each relationship served specific mystical purpose. Some men provided masculine energy for rituals. Others offered connections with specific clans. Some were chosen purely for exceptional sexual potency. Virginity was antithesis of vulva power. Sexually inexperienced women were considered spiritually immature, incapable of accessing mystical dimensions, requiring deep, intimate knowledge of body and pleasure. Vulvas often began sexual life very young, specifically to develop powers. Some vulvas specialized exclusively in sexual magic. They offered services combining sexual therapy with spiritual healing, treating male impotence, female frigidity, and fertility problems through personalized, intimate rituals. Most powerful vulvas could influence politics through strategic sexuality. They seduced leaders to obtain information, form alliances, or manipulate important decisions. It was sacralized sexual espionage. Other cultures would consider common prostitution. Mystical rituals related to intimacy. Vulva rituals incorporated explicit sexuality as advanced spiritual technology. These events weren't uncontrolled orgies, but precisely choreographed ceremonies where each sexual act had specific mystical meaning and clear ritual objective. Seidr, Nordic magic practiced by vulvas, frequently involved ritual masturbation to induce prophetic trance. Vulvas masturbated using consecrated wooden staffs while chanting specific incantations, reaching orgasms, functioning as portals to other dimensions. Fertility rituals included ceremonial sex between vulva and male volunteers chosen by community. These acts occurred publicly during festivals, with entire village observing as spiritual witnesses. It was sacralized sex, supposedly guaranteeing abundant harvests and healthy births. Sexual healing ceremonies were conducted to treat intimate dysfunctions of men and women. Vulvas diagnosed problems through detailed genital examination, then prescribed treatments including sexual massage, therapeutic intimate acts, and ingestion of vulva's own bodily fluids. Death rituals incorporated sexual elements to facilitate spiritual transition of dying. Vulvas performed sexual acts near agonizing people, believing orgasmic energy helped souls detach from bodies and reach afterlife adequately. Spirit invocation frequently required sexual offerings. Vulvas maintained relations with specifically chosen men as horses for supernatural entities, allowing spirits to experience physical pleasure through human bodies during ritual possession. The connection between spirituality and sexuality. In Viking cosmology, sexuality and spirituality were inseparable aspects of same fundamental cosmic force. Vulvas understood orgasm as moment of temporary union with divinity, when barriers between physical and spiritual worlds dissolved completely. Fertility goddesses like Freya were spiritual models for vulvas. These divinities were simultaneously powerful warriors, and sexually voracious beings. Demonstrating spiritual strength and sexual appetite complemented each other rather than contradicting. Sexual energy was considered fuel for most powerful magic. Vulvas accumulated power through intense sexual activity, then channeled this accumulated energy into spells, prophecies, and healings. It was a spiritual system requiring regular and varied sexual practice. Bodily fluids had specific magical properties in vulva practice. Menstrual blood was especially powerful for curses and protections. Semen collected from multiple partners was used in fertility potions. Vaginal secretions were ingredients in love philters. Vulvas practiced group sex as form of amplifying spiritual power. Multiple participants created more intense energy field, allowing more powerful magic. These rituals were carefully orchestrated to maximize collective sexual energy. Celibacy was considered form of spiritual mutilation for vulvas. Women renouncing sex lost connection with fundamental cosmic forces and became spiritually sterile. It was heresy against divine feminine nature. Vulvas interpreted dreams and visions through explicit sexual symbolism. Erotic images in dreams were direct messages from gods requiring specialized interpretation. It was spiritual language speaking through body and desire. Vulva death frequently involved final sexual rituals. Some chose to die during orgasm, believing this guaranteed smooth transition to afterlife. Others were buried with consecrated sexual objects to maintain power in death. Vulva tradition was brutally suppressed during Scandinavian Christianization. Church considered vulvas diabolic witches, whose sacred sexuality was abomination against Christian divine order. Many were executed, their knowledge lost forever. Imagine explaining to your Viking mother-in-law that you want to divorce because your husband doesn't use deodorant. Picture this. You're sitting before a woman who probably decapitated 3 enemies before breakfast, trying to delicately explain that her son has personal hygiene issues. The Viking mother-in-law looks at you with that expression saying, "I survived 3 winters eating only dried fish, and you're complaining about smell?" But surprisingly, she understands you completely. Actually, she agrees that persistent bad breath is totally legitimate grounds for divorce. After all, if a man can't keep his mouth clean, how can he maintain a prosperous farm? Viking logic was brutal, but consistent. The conversation gets even stranger when she starts suggesting practical solutions before total divorce. Have you tried rubbing coarse salt on his teeth while he sleeps? Or how about forcing him to chew aromatic herbs before any conjugal activity? The funniest part is this same mother-in-law probably already had similar conversations with other daughters-in-law about her own sons. Imagine the family reunion. Olaf doesn't wash his feet. Eric wears the same clothes for 3 weeks. And don't make me talk about Magnus's intestinal habits. The bizarre contraceptive methods that would make you grateful for modernity. Forget complaining about modern birth control pills. Viking women inserted small polished stones in uterus as primitive IUD. Yes, stones. Imagine the conversation. "Honey, I need to go to the beach to get some more little stones for my uterus." The wool tampon soaked in honey and vinegar method seems like salad recipe gone wrong. Women literally transformed their vaginas into pickle jars hoping to avoid pregnancy. The smell must have been interesting. Artemisia chewed before sex created unforgettable romantic situations. Nothing says seduction like chewing bitter herbs for 15 minutes before intimacy. The partner waiting patiently while she chews furiously must have questioned their life choices. The most bizarre method was drinking pregnant mare urine mixed with fermented beer. Imagine explaining this to visitors. Sorry for the delay. I was preparing my morning contraceptive cocktail. Some methods were so disgusting they probably worked through pure sexual discouragement. How Vikings solved conjugal performance issues. When your husband couldn't perform, Vikings had solutions that would impress modern pharmaceuticals. Vulvas prescribed treatments including eating bull testicles, drinking wolf blood, and, well, direct sexual therapy with the vulva herself. Imagine the medical consultation. Doctor, my husband is having difficulties. I understand. I'll need him to eat these raw testicles, and then I'll give a practical demonstration of what your wife needs. Personalized medicine taken to extreme. For premature ejaculation, they recommended dipping penis in ice water before sex. Imagine the logistics. Honey, can you wait a few minutes? I need to freeze my equipment first. Pure romance. Women with low libido received even more creative treatments. Vulvas prescribed specific diets including oysters, honey, and bodily fluids from men considered especially virile. It was medicine mixing nutrition.